in my teeth.
Are you advertising?
Where?
Right.
And I hope you are.
Okay, I believe we are ready whenever you are, Mayor.
Where is Commissioner Lyle Smith? I don't see her.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I need to start my video. That's why. Just kidding.
There we go. Okay, this is enough. It's all right.
Okay, I'll call the work session for the Oregon City Commission to order for Wednesday, August 5th.
All right, the roll call, we'll do Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Present.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith. Here. Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. And just for your edification, I'm going to turn my video off because it slows down my feed here at the house. So I'm only going to turn my video on when I need to. Go ahead.
All right, the next agenda item is public comment, and that's for anything that's not currently on the agenda. I don't have any public comment for this time period, and I just realized that I am looking at the wrong agenda to begin with.
Public comment? Yeah, we usually don't.
I was going to say, we normally take public comment at a work session.
Well, we do, but we don't have any today.
We don't. So hold on just a second.
It's Mr. Lewis with Transportation Capital Funding Priority Review and Discussion.
Great. So you want to bring up my presentation, Katie?
I
and
sure
we'll get
do.
started here. Thank you very much, Mayor and Commissioners. It is good to see all of you. It seems like it's been a while. So thank you for being here tonight. We do want to talk to you about transportation capital funding and how we prioritize projects. The size of our two largest capital projects in quite some time underway, we had, and the concerns that we've had over our gas tax revenues, we kind of had hoped to give you an update about, how we prioritize projects. But that combined with some of the things that we heard with from Bob Lassell and the CIC, his testimony, and we've seen some other comments from the community. We kind of wanted to wrap the transportation capital funding priority review with the discussion about the Holcomb Boulevard crosswalks. So that's kind of our intent, and we'll get through it as quickly as we can.
Mr. Lewis, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Have you received any forecasts from the state as of yet about what the gas tax revenue might be?
Yes, we have. That's a great question. We have a slide on it where I'm going to talk about that. So good question though. We have been getting information from ODOT about that.
Fantastic.
Commissioner McGriff? Commissioner McGriff?
I'm here.
In the future, could you contact me before you ask a question, please? I'm still running the meeting.
Okay, I'll carry on from there. So we basically have 5 revenue sources for our transportation fund, and the fuel taxes, which is our base, which we've had for many, many years, In 2017, the legislature passed the Get Moving bill, which adds about $600,000 to our transportation fund. And so between those two, those make up our gas taxes. Now, as you know, fuel taxes, I call them gas taxes, fuel taxes have essentially kind of peaked in a lot of ways because of higher efficiency vehicles. And now with COVID, we're seeing quite a drop off in vehicle miles traveled. So for the gas tax, we're going to talk more about that, but up there in red is kind of that projection for over the biennium, what we anticipate the COVID reduction in travel miles costing the city. So Commissioner McGriff, that kind of answers your question. They have been giving us quarterly updates. Our finance department's been doing a pretty good job of tracking that and sharing that with us. So we're pretty in tune with where that's at. Gas tax revenues saw a decrease from that. We saw in 2020 a $190,000 reduction over what we had planned to get from the state for gas taxes, and we expect another $200,000 in 2021. So that's where that $390,000 comes from. So that's a pretty big hit for our because that goes into really those are funds that are a little more usable. We have to use those funds within the right-of-way. They're for transportation projects, but they're a little more flexible than, say, the transportation system development charges that we collect. The other ad that we have is in 2019, Clackamas County adopted a vehicle registration fee, and that's new for 2020. So while that has also been impacted by the pandemic, we're seeing less revenues there. We didn't budget to receive much of those, so in whatever we receive from vehicle registration over this budget cycle is helping to balance that $390,000 change in gas taxes. So, but the vehicle registration fee, when they asked about how we intended to use it, we were really intending to use it with some of those projects that didn't have a match. You know, many of our projects have a transportation system development charge element that we can pay out of them, or a percentage that we can pay out of them. Lots of times our gap is in the other side of that, which is the non-growth share and how we fund that. Because most of our fuel taxes go towards day-to-day operations, keeping the lights on, paying for staffing, those kinds of things, paying for equipment and materials. That's where most of our gas taxes go. So we really don't have a lot of capital funding that goes into, that comes from the fuel tax side of our budget. So that Clackamas County vehicle registration fee was the intent was to keep that pretty focused on projects that need additional funding that's not transportation SDCs. And then, of course, you're very familiar with our pavement maintenance program. And pavement maintenance utility fees. Those are monthly fees that we collect that is all pretty much dedicated to either pavement maintenance or, in some cases, ADA access ramps around those pavement maintenance projects. I skipped, for some reason, transportation, but SDC revenues are dependent on development, of course, and they vary back and forth. I've got a slide that kind of shows you a little bit of history of where those are at. But we collect both, we collect vehicle and we collect a bike and pedestrian system development charge. And grants, again, we've been very successful with grant, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well, but that's another source of revenue for most of our transportation projects. So I don't know if you all have the same pictures across the bottom of your screen, but this slide kind of shows the, maybe you can move that for the viewing audience, but this is kind of a history of the actual expenditures since 2015, and then the budget amounts for 2020 and 21. And generally, transportation system development charges, which is the kind of the darker blue, we saw a lot of development in 2017, and so we saw a little peak there in terms of transportation system development charges, but generally from year to year, we're in that $1 million range for collection of transportation SDCs, and we tend to save that. And we save it because I guess the other light bluer line is gas taxes again. And we're really not even showing the county vehicle registration fee in these slides because these are all budget numbers and we didn't really budget to collect any of that vehicle registration fee. But those are our revenues that, so the vertical bars are the revenues. The lines are kind of our capital outlay. And as I said, this year and next year is a pretty big jump in what we would normally see. So, you know, aside from workload, we're spending a lot of workload trying to manage those projects, but it's also a pretty big hit, and we've been able to build those projects because we did set aside and we held a large fund balance for some time to be able to pay for, like, for instance, the Myers Road project is probably the biggest. It's 100% SDC fundable. And then the yellow line on the bottom part of that is really more along the lines of what we spend in gas or fuel tax for capital. And generally that stays pretty low. I would say in 16, 17, and 18, we were more in a savings mode for the upcoming Molalla project. And in 19, 20, and 21, it was more of a spending mode for that. But typically we are in that $300,000 per year range for fuel tax revenue spent on capital. So it's really not a lot. The other thing I wanted to mention is our contingency in the transportation revenue fund, and this doesn't include SDCs, but in the gas tax or the fuel tax side of the house, it's really, actually, we've spent that down, or we're projected to spend that down pretty low in 2021 as we complete the Molalla Avenue project. And by spending it down pretty low, we've got an ending fund balance there, or a contingency of around $250,000. That's lower than we've had in the past. So we're pushing pretty hard to use those funds, but to preserve as much of those funds as we can. So the question comes up about how we prioritize transportation projects, and I would say it's not an exact science. It's well informed, though, I think, by many of these factors, and so I just wanted to go through that. When we discuss projects in-house and budget for projects in-house and try and maneuver those funds as the projects go from a concept plan to an actual construction plan, lots of times we have to make decisions internally about how we're going to fund all the things that we had intended to fund. And this year, we've done a really good job of that, I think, but it's still tight. It's still something that we need to keep our finger on the pulse of, working with our finance department to do that. We get quarterly updates, which I think has been very, very helpful on how things are going, both on the spending side and the revenue side. But when we think about projects and prioritization, we start with the city commission goals. And, you know, the best example of that is what we're doing with Molalla Avenue and Myers Road. Those are direct commission goals. The other thing I think qualifies as a commission goal is when we're talking about economic development or key areas where the commission is really focused on. The Beaver Creek Road area is one of those areas that comes to mind when we talk about that. So there's other projects that aren't necessarily listed in your goals, but what we hear from the commission is interest in doing other things too, like Holcomb Boulevard, for instance. So we do pay attention to that. So community interest, I can't find a project in our master plan or in our budget that doesn't have a community interest element in it. And how that's collected happens in a variety of ways. Some of it's testimony in front of the city commission. Most of it's testimony through either the Transportation Advisory Committee, the neighborhood. And we as staff attend a lot of meetings, and because many of, especially the bigger projects, even the small projects that I'll talk about are they take several years to get to completion. So we have several opportunities to hear from community, and they're usually pretty straightforward about their desire to see projects done. So there's not a project in our list that doesn't have a community interest element to it. Adopted plans, I think, we've got concept plans, we've got our transportation system plan, we've got corridor plans. I guess they're all those plans are aspirational. I guess I'll emphasize that. The plan you're probably most familiar with is the urban renewal plan. That's an aspirational plan, and I think that's similar to some of the things that we're doing with our transportation plans. They're aspirational. They help guide development decisions. They help to inform the community of our intentions, and they support funding requests sometimes when we're trying to apply for a grant. It makes a big difference whether a project is listed in a plan or not. So it helps to inform that progress. And I think usually our plans remain valid for many, many years, even though I think, Malala Avenue plan is a year 2000 plan. So that plan has remained relatively valid with the exception of maybe some of the cost information that was included in that original plan. We do like to leverage opportunities, and there's good examples of that with Malala Avenue project. The other kind of small one that I like to think of because it was more recent, which was Partlow Road, where we were doing a paving project. We used some transportation SDCs to try to complete as much sidewalk on at least one side of that street as possible. We do a lot with our utility funds to try and leverage those projects with transportation projects. So that's an important piece. And then grant funding opportunities. Most of our projects have some grant associated with them. As I'll share in a little bit, any project that we have in progress, for the most part, has grant funding associated with it. So, and then partnerships, I think, again, Myers Road is a good example of that with the community college. They committed like $2.6 million to the intersection at 213 and Myers Road to help create the left turn pocket or the right turn pocket there. And I think all of those things play into, and there's a lot of subjectivity, I think, that goes into reviewing these, but we try to stay pretty close to the adopted budget more often than not. And again, at the end of the day, we're also trying to balance needs between, drivers, walkers, people on bikes, and any access to transit. So, I guess the other thing I wanted to say on the grant piece, in the last 5 years, the department's received over $7 million in transportation grant funding, and I think that's an important piece not to forget about when looking at our transportation programs. They're getting much more competitive, and folks are looking a lot harder at the plans that we have in place and the criteria that they use to make those selections. So we're pretty prescriptive about projects that we apply for certain types of grants. So projects in progress, the Berkeley Hills Rapid Flashing Beacon, or rectangular rapid flashing beacon, that's our RFB. Obviously there was community input for that crosswalk, and it's shown in our transportation system plan. The Malala Avenue Streetscape project, this is a third phase of a project that's been in a plan since 2000. So these projects, especially the big ones, take years to complete and usually multiple phases. But again, in that project, we're able to hit most of the check marks. We didn't list partnership there because we don't have another partner who's actually contributing dollars to that. But I like to think of all the businesses along the corridor as part of our partners. Myers Road Extension Project, same kind of deal. The partnership there was with the community college. Gaffney Lane sidewalk infill, that's been on the burner since 2018. We acquired some property well before that with the idea of extending that roadway and widening that roadway. It's right near the school and kind of is a bit of a barrier to school children wanting to get to Gaffney Lane Elementary School. So we budgeted for that. We're still committed to that. In fact, we're moving forward with that project as well. The shuttle service in the city, and that's coming forward.
Hold on, it sounds like the mayor had something.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Mr. Lewis, do you know what the school district's plan is for Gaffney Lane?
I don't specifically, but I know they have a proposal in. I just haven't looked at it. So there is some improvements there is some improvements that they're proposing with I think an addition of not a temporary building, but a modular building. But beyond that, I'm not sure, Mayor. What was the question?
Well, I think we need to know the district's long-term plan for Gaffney Lane.
Okay. Oregon City's first last mile shuttle service, that's moving along. That's a collaboration between the county and a couple of other cities. And we expect to see shuttle service here in Oregon City soon. But that's got a small grant match associated with it that we're contributing to. And then Holcomb Safe Routes to School grant prep work, that is also a project that's in progress, and the submittal for that grant application is bearing down real quick. It's this month. So these are other projects that are in the queue, and some of which you may be familiar with or not. The Lynn Avenue rectangular rapid flashing beacon is associated with both the police department, but more importantly, the school district. So they've paid a fee in lieu for that. We're trying to figure out how to incorporate that into their street reconstruction project. And so we're leveraging some funds there. We know it's in our master plan, and we know it's a community interest. The thing that I think is important about the Gardner Middle School is that those students are of the age that parents will likely allow them to walk to school on their own. And so having that safe route to school is important. We also budgeted some money to help build other sidewalks in the adjacent streets. So that's in the queue. We're kind of trying to figure out how to fund that and when the right time is to fund that. I wrote down the acronym for this, and I don't recall it right now, but we'll just call it traffic signal upgrades. There's a grant associated with that Dana Webb's applied for and received. It's a little over $1 million. It will upgrade many signals across the city with a lot of the safety measures that you've seen at some of like Pearl and Malala, where we added some of those safety improvements. So that's in a master plan, and it's also kind of a partnership effort. The Beaver Creek Road Arts Project, this is another grant that we've got funding for. Actually, I think I've got the dollar amount wrong on that traffic signal upgrade. It's the arts grant that was a little bit more than $1 million. But anyway, significant signal improvement projects, and those grants have some match associated with them. I want to say the notes I'm looking at here says the TSMO grant has got a $17,000 match, and the Beaver Creek All Roads Transportation Safety Project has a $100,000 grant, a match. So we're planning to move forward with that. We're committed to those. The 99E bike and ped improvements. So this is more related to what's going on down near in terms of grant funding along the Willamette Falls project. This is really between 10th Street and the Willamette Falls project. So again, we're trying to get some planning dollars to better establish how to deal with pedestrian movements along the viaduct, along 99E, around the Oregon City West Lynn Bridge, around 99E. So that's our grant match on that is $80,000. And I forget the dollar amount on that one, but again, good grant funding for the city. And then Holcomb Boulevard, we're breaking this out for you tonight to talk about 2 rapid flashing beacons at Swan and Front, and then the other 2 that have been discussed at Winston and Oak Tree Terrace. What we've determined since last hearing from the commission is 2 of those are fairly straightforward. We're planning to move forward with those and get the design work done while we're applying for the grant. If the grant comes in, we know that those funds will count towards our grant match. So, we're proposing to move forward with those relatively quickly. The other one of them is has a issue in that it's in a natural hazard resource area, so there's some process associated with that fits very well with the grant match project, but not very well on its own. So there's that piece, and then the other one has some right-of-way acquisition that would also fit very well with an overall grant match project that has those elements in other parts of the project, like the sidewalk widening. So we would like to suggest to the commission that we take care of the easy two at Swan and Front and maintain the plan to move forward with the other two with the grant and keep our fingers crossed that we get that grant. There's also a development proposal up in near those other two crosswalk locations that we're following pretty closely.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
So, do either the one at Swan or what was the other one?
Front?
Yeah. Do either one of those connect with that trail that comes out of the neighborhood to the south of Holcomb Boulevard?
I'm trying to think of it. Oh, the trail you're thinking of is in the newer, well, what I think of as newer, it's 20 years old now, but the,
Correct.
the Oak Tree Terrace, the new housing off of Oak Tree Terrace. And no, neither one of those do, but that's true for all four. None of them do. So the two don't, nor do the four. There's really not a great crosswalk location adjacent to that existing path. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I have a graphic, I'll show you. So,
You're running out of time, by the way.
okay. Well, again, we're going to suggest that, I think I talked through this enough, but that's what we would like the city commission to kind of authorize, which is move forward with the two easy ones on Front and Swan. And let's see how we do with the grant before we make a decision on the other two. This is a graphic that shows those two at Swan and Front. I know you can't see this, but maybe Katie can, but this pathway right here is the one that you're talking about, Mayor, and with the corner and the grades there, it's really not a great place for a crosswalk. So the other two, there's one here at Oak Tree Terrace. There is a regional trail plan that's shown to go through that area, which is also kind of impacted by the development in this area. And so there's some details to be worked out there that fit pretty well with if all the stars aligned and we had development approval and the Holcomb grant, we would likely be very successful there. We've talked a little bit about the cost of these rapid flashing beacons and why, what I've shared in the past is what's been in our transportation system plan, which has been a budgetary number of $35,000. And what we've kind of come to learn what that number represents is really the cost of the equipment. So for instance, along Malala Avenue, where the three rapid flashing beacons are on that, we're seeing the cost associated with those rapid flashing beacons being around that $40,000 mark. But the rest of the work is kind of playing out and spread across all the other projects with sidewalk improvements, electrical for the street light, metering, et cetera. So you take this minimum cost is more likely what we're going to see for Berkeley Hills. And, we've seen other indications, like if we had to move forward with some of those that are a little more difficult along Holcomb Boulevard, to see those be much more expensive because of some of the issues associated with those. So those are I would say the maximum number is another theoretical number, but we're just trying to give you a sense of it really helps the city to, one, get a grant to help cover some of these costs, and two, to combine them with leverage them with another project. I'm not going to go through this in too much. I think we'll wrap this one up. I think there's a lot of other project need out there, just saying, for projects, some of which are on your goals that we probably need to talk about, but we get a lot of requests, and just some of those are listed here. Almost all of them have community interest. I'm still struggling to figure out, the last Trillium Park Drive meeting I went to was, pretty frustrating for the neighborhood, and yet that's a fairly expensive project. That's a $600 to $1 million project. So, there's lots of examples of other projects. So really our last slide is this one here is, are you in agreement that we should move forward with staff recommendation on the Holcomb Boulevard? So breaking out the two easy ones now, moving forward with the grant application and seeing how we do on that before we make a decision on the other two. And then, we've presented some metrics here. Any feedback you have about those? And then, these larger projects, we just recognize that to be able to fund a larger project like a Myers Road or a Malal Avenue project, our strategy has been to set aside money for that and let those fund balances build. That has to usually happen over a multitude of commissions, right? Commissioners come and go, and we make those decisions on a roadway that may be pretty important, and we need to kind of continue moving forward with that. And that's what these plans help us do. But if the tendency is more to want to spend on, things that are always going to be a community ask, there's always going to be a community ask for something. And I think we need to have the understanding that maybe some of those bigger projects might have a higher need. So that's it for the presentation.
Mayor Holliday, I have a question.
Questions?
Yes, Mayor Holliday, I have a question.
Commissioner McGrath.
Mr. Lewis, I was kind of interested in the cost of the flashing beacon. So I'm assuming since the one that was placed at 7th and John Adams, the cost has gone up on those considerably?
Yes, it has.
Sort of inflation, equipment, is it newer materials?
Yeah, and some of that we did. That was a learning experience for us. So I think the equipment was less expensive at the time.
Right.
We did some of that in-house. We had existing sidewalks. We didn't necessarily do much for improvements to those existing sidewalks. So yeah, that was a cheaper installation. And I think there's opportunities for us to do some of those, if, given the right timing. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the best way is to package it with another project.
Yeah, I've gotten asked over the last few months about, well, why did this one go in and this one didn't? And I said, I answered the way you said it, was the infrastructure was already there. It wasn't like they had to construct it from nothing, and there weren't any storm drainage issues, there weren't natural resource issues, there weren't,
right.
It was an existing system. So I said, that's why it didn't cost what we're showing here now, because we've got completely different circumstances. So I think that's something that the public needs to understand. It's not just like we can just, plop them anywhere.
Yeah, and to be fair, we haven't shared that level of detail. I've been sharing the $35,000 number pretty regularly, and so better understanding of that is what I'm sharing with you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
You're muted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to say this as plain and simply as I can, and one and done. We talk about metrics. The first metric for any government should be the safety of its people, community safety, and that's what we're talking about. Because I can tell you, Holcomb is a speedway. It's going to get worse with development. Park Place is a growth area. We've got 90-some acres coming up for development, and with that development comes transportation SDCs. And honestly, grants are nice, but I wouldn't let those be the controlling factor. They don't need to be the controlling financial factor or component. I heard Mr. Lewis talk about spending down the contingency. I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't want the contingency to be a slush fund. A contingency by definition is for unexplained or unexpected expenses, not a voluntary expenditure to dip into because we've got it laying around doing nothing. And as when I looked at his graph, with the exception of 2017, the revenue shown is consistent, and even not including the vehicle registration fees, which we haven't parlayed in there. And quite honestly, I don't think that COVID is going to impact those at all. You may choose not to drive much, but unless you're not going to re-register your car or sell it, you're going to pay those fees. So that should be part of our equation on the revenue side. And to me, everything but safety is secondary. And Park Place is long overdue. I think we need to reevaluate the queue of the projects, and the first priority should be safety. And I say find the money somehow, some way, and reevaluate the queue. Look at those contingencies, look at sources of revenue, and see what we can accomplish and how soon. Because what the community wants to know, even if you're talking about those first two at Swan and Front, they don't care about how your planning stage. When can you get them done? What do you think can be done? So my thought is safety first, and everything else is a distant second. Thank you.
Commissioner Lyle Smith?
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. So it sounds like you are using SDC funds, or would be using SDC funds for the sidewalk crossings. Is that correct? The rapid flashing beacons?
Right, so the way the transportation methodology, system charge methodology works for SDCs is pedestrian and bike improvements are across the board, 40% transportation SDC fundable. And then it's the other 60% that we have to find a way to fund either through vehicle registration fees or gas taxes.
So SDCs, they are being used, but they're only part of the equation,
Right.
and they don't pay for everything.
Right.
Is there an ability to lower the speed on Holcomb?
There is an ability, and we are supporting that. We've actually submitted to ODOT for a request for them to do their study. They established those speed zones, and they were making good progress on that. At least that's what they were telling us. And then pandemic, Dana's been on that, checking on that, and I think they're backlogged. It's not a huge department that does that, but
But we're trying. We've requested.
Oh, yeah.
It's in ODOT's queue.
and
We're kind of waiting on ODOT.
we've done a lot of work with the neighborhood on validation of this speeding concern,
Right.
and police have been up there. I haven't talked to Jim lately about it, but there was a concerted effort that went up there.
Right.
They actually had a hidden speed device instead of a signed speed device. It gives you feedback. And so those results were shared with the neighborhood and the Transportation Advisory Committee.
And then finally, how much money for the grant application that you're putting in, how much money is the grant? How much would we be getting from the grant to do the project?
I'm going to defer to Dana. She's on the line here. I don't remember the numbers for that. Dana, can you answer that question?
So the total cost of the Holcomb Safe Routes to School grant application is $1.68 million. Our grant match would be $334,000, and because we would be only expending $334,000, we could use entirely transportation SDCs for that match. If we do a project on our own, we would need to only spend 40% SDCs, so that our match is less than the 40% maximum we could spend.
Right. Okay. And then my final question is those rapid flashing beacons cost a lot of money. So is there somewhere in the middle, a middle ground or a temporary measure for the two that's been requested, like signage and striping that doesn't require electricity and sidewalks and ramps and all that kind of, like, is there anything that can be done in the interim to help on those other two locations that would be reasonable?
I've spent a lot less time looking at those than others, but, given the speed, we've heard a lot. I've walked that facility a fair amount. I've biked that facility a fair amount. And my sense is there's legitimacy to the concerns about the speed of the traffic through there. I worry about placing a striped crosswalk along that boulevard given the speeds, and I think given the fact that a lot of the times the speed limit isn't adhered to. So I'd be reluctant to just stripe a crosswalk there without the rapid flashing beacon on that facility.
Right.
There's other facilities where, you know, at an intersection, even though it's not stop controlled, we could do that, but I would
Yeah.
not recommend that.
Okay, for safety reasons.
For safety reasons.
And that makes sense, and I will tell you, I live right on Myers. Myers is it is kind of like a speedway. It is 35 mile an hour. However, I know there's plenty of people that, I've seen people blow right through the three-way stop at Gaffney Lane while I was walking my dog, just not even slow down and drive right through. I've seen plenty of people speed, and we have crosswalks that have no flashing beacons. Sometimes people stop, sometimes they don't, and sometimes they go flying right by. And so I appreciate the real acknowledgement that there is some hazard there, and we certainly don't want to make residents feel more safe. I think once you walk out there and you realize people aren't going to stop, you learn that you kind of have to really take your time and ease out there, and you know, it makes pedestrians have to really make sure that people are stopped before you go out there, because they don't just follow the sign. So I guess you're looking for direction. Because we have so many projects, I support your proposal of 2 now, get them going. The other 2, we don't operate this city without leveraging grants, leveraging partners, leveraging money. That's just the way our system works. And I know about the Gaffney Lane crossing. I know it's been in the queue for years, and all of these other projects. And so I would like to see in the future, though, your capital improvement plans, whatever you're planning, I would like to see some type of distribution by neighborhood so that we can see, you know, where are all the funds being spent by neighborhood? Because right now we have no idea, and we have a neighborhood that is saying, you know, they haven't been heard, they haven't received stuff. And so without seeing that data, I have no way of saying which neighborhoods and knowing which neighborhoods have received sidewalks and crosswalks and funding. So I think that would be useful. That's it.
Commissioner Smith?
I agree for the most part. I think focusing on Holcomb in the first 2 and going, I don't mind us going forward with the grant, but I think that we need to be very careful what we do if we don't get that grant. We need to be prepared for that, and we need to be prepared for having a plan to move forward with those 2 if and when we find out that grant doesn't come through, because I think we do need to move on those other 2 in that, you know, pretty much that same timeline, with or without the grant. But the approach that we are talking about, I think, is fine, as long as we come back and revisit it when we find, if and when we find out we don't get that grant.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Yes, Mayor Holliday.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I want to concur with both Commissioners Smiths, if that's the way to say it properly, that, yes, I'd like to see us move forward with the 2 projects on Swan and Front, but I also support moving up the South Safe Routes to School Holcomb project up in our priority list. I think that, agreeing with Commissioner Lyle Smith, that yes, we need to leverage as much as we possibly can, because that makes our tax dollars go further. But what, again, is concerning, and John and I, you know, I've had conversations about Holcomb. I mean, I get nervous when I drive up there, just because of the speed. Part of the issue is something that we don't control. It's awareness. I can't tell you how many times I've been at the library or at the corner of 7th and John Adams watching the beacon that's been there, and people just blow right by it.
Stop.
They don't, they're not paying attention, whatever's going on with them, or they're distracted, and people push it and they wait, and then they've got to wait for people. And that's been there, what, probably 6-7 years now? So I support these, and again, I support your moving forward with the first 2, but moving those other 2 up in the priority list. Safety is critical.
Thank you. So I want to say I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell on this. I think we've spent way too long putting Holcomb into second-class citizen status. But I also have a question about the actual equipment. John, you know that I was an electrician for a long time. I'm not sure that we need to have underground boring and constant power to these installations. I don't understand why we can't do this with solar and batteries and wireless connections. It would seem to me that you could do that with, 20 grand, not 100 grand.
I know that there's options there. We will look at those. One of the things that we have agreed with the county does most of our signal maintenance, and so they have a standard. Now, whether they have a solar standard that they'll accept, I'm not sure. But I hear you loud and clear, Mayor. If there's a better, more cost-effective way that doesn't require us to, especially on a short-term plan is to have it be solar, and long-term plan is to get power in there when we come through with the sidewalks. We'll look at that.
Well, I'm going to talk about solar. I'm talking about solar and then the communications between the two sides. That could be done wirelessly, so you don't have to underground bore and connect the two sides together and do all that. And I don't really care about what the county standards are. If we can do it and we can do it cheaper and we can get it in faster, that's what I want to do.
Agreed.
Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have something?
No, I just agree with everything you just said. Let's not develop tunnel vision. Let's figure out how we can do it and how we can do it rapidly.
Okay, is there anything else, Mr. Lewis?
That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
And Mayor, I just wanted to state for the record, there was several submittals on this agenda item, so I just wanted to state that for the record.
Thank you for getting
So
those to us.
I assume that everybody read that. If you have, at least give us an indication or say yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on the work session?
No, sir.
We're going to take 5 and we'll move right into the urban renewal meeting.
Right.